Okay, here we go. Hello, everybody. This is our Friday, January 28th episode of Between Two Teachers, where we talk about the latest issues nationally, sometimes internationally, and of course, locally on education. And right now, we are in a state of emergency. We are at a point of crisis in our schools locally. So we're going to try to give you some overview and our opinions. We always try to talk about best practices. I always try to find hope. It's getting harder, but there is hope. Okay, so we're going to get started on that. And my name is Consuelo Lara.
And I'm Natalie Cronenberg. And we always begin with our land acknowledgement. We pause to acknowledge that we are gathered on the ancestral territory of Huichin, part of the unceded land of the Chochenyo and Karkan-speaking Muwekma Ohlone people. We remember their continued connection to our region and give thanks to them for allowing us to live, work, learn, and pray on their traditional homeland, and offer our respect to their elders and all Ohlone people of the past and present. And as Consuelo said, this is been an unbelievable time, really. You think things have gotten better, and it doesn't always turn out that way. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happened nationally. Nationally, the interesting story is how different states are looking at masking procedures, for example. And the masking procedures in Virginia, which has been a really high-profile, politically active state, this week they began the end of the masking mandate, and so they've had Maskless Monday. That was the big news, and they continue to believe that you don't need masks. It is uneven, and it's uneven, honestly, across the country. It's going district by district as you go from state to state. So it is incredibly confusing as far as that goes. But Maskless Monday made a lot of news.
You know, it reminds me of when we have a Spirit Week. That's how frivolous they're talking about it, as if,
yes,
we have Pajama Day, and now we have Maskless Mondays. Like,
exactly, that you gave it that title. Exactly. As opposed to thinking that there's anything here that really deals with life and death.
Life and death.
Right. And so the families that have lost family members are being completely disrespected in this whole.
Yeah, trivialized.
Completely trivialized. Exactly. Yeah. All right. So that's the national story. The California story, and I am just going to bring this up because this is an overlay, and we'll get to more about specifically the coronavirus issues, but I cannot overlook what happened this week in Oakland. In Oakland, there was a state mandate for them, a fiscal mandate that came to them from the county, Alameda County, that they adopt a budget that's balanced and then will be balanced into the future. And the conversation around that really began in December. This month, this week, there was an issue that came up, and they decided to solve the problem of their budget by closing schools. So they issued a list. They decided to do that. They set a board meeting to do it. And normally when you're going to close schools, I've been involved in closing schools, you have a long period of community outreach. You talk to each of the school communities. You see whether or not there's some, what works together. If you are going to merge two schools together, you have conversations with the school community. Now, that doesn't mean that you just send an email to the principal. It means you have a conversation with the PTA, the community members who support that school. You have a conversation, and it usually takes at least a year. You get a year to know that this is the last year your school is going to be open. In this case, the school board took a different direction in the district, and they decided on that they were going to put together this list of schools to close to meet this requirement that they said they have to meet because the county requires them to come up with a balanced budget. And the only way they can do this, as far as what they've said, is to consolidate their schools and close schools. So they gave a list of the schools they were consolidating. They had a meeting with one of their trustees, their directors, Mr. Hutchinson, on Tuesday morning. And on Tuesday morning, and he ran on the sole issue he ran on, the number one issue was keeping these schools open, keeping all schools open in the city of Oakland. Because Oakland has a great many smaller schools, but they are community hubs throughout our low-income areas throughout Oakland. And these are schools that people have a real deep attachment to, and that you need to have conversations with the communities about what their future will be. Anyway, Mr. Hutchinson went to this meeting Tuesday morning and was given the list, and he immediately tweeted it out. Now, I will tell you, I knew he was going to do that. I follow him on Twitter and on Facebook. Anybody who followed him knew that is exactly what he was going to do. Shortly after that, the Oakland News Department, the communications department, sent something out apologizing for the fact that the list was put out on social media by him, and saying that the problem was his lack of protocol in releasing this when they hadn't known that he was going to release it. They wanted to release it Friday night, tonight, before the meeting that is going to decide whether or not they pick those schools, which will be Monday. So that they wanted to release it Friday for a Monday meeting because there would be no opportunity for people to show up and dispute it and criticize them and give them feedback on this strategy. Then they're going to have the final decision in order to meet the county's deadline. This is what they said is the reason they have the deadline. Final decision would be made. They're going to do January 31st for the list and February 8th for the final decision, and those schools would all be closed.
Wow.
This is so disrespectful to the community. And so the problem is not that Mr. Hutchinson released the names of these schools. When he released them, then the newspaper, and he told them he would do this. He also made sure the media knew. There was media coverage. There were 350 people at the board meeting the other night that went for 8 hours and had many, many people, I think an hour and a half of people who just commented on this because it wasn't on the agenda. But what was on the agenda was a overview, a report on how they are doing in support of the Black children in Oakland, the Black reparations and Black thriving families report. And that report was issued by a task force. And of course, this was before all of this had happened. And predominantly, these schools are predominantly African American and Latino schools. These are schools that are not the schools in the hills. There are no white schools on this list. Right? These are low-income schools. So they had their meeting, and during that meeting, and when the reparations committee, when the reparations issue was brought up on the agenda, or before that, the folks that were going to bring it up, the task force chairs said they would not give the report because they were incensed at how disrespectful it was that they hadn't been contacted and nobody had been contacted. And they believed it was racist. And they renamed the resolution the White Supremacy Resolution. And that is where we are in Oakland today. So there is folks that are organizing for Monday's meeting, talking to the board members, and Oakland has a majority. There's only one white member to their school board. Their school board is not a majority white school board.
Yep.
There are all kinds of reasons that, and ways to approach this, but to have this many schools closed just like that is stunning.
Yes.
I assume that there were people who spoke who were also attorneys from the ACLU and parents in the district and members of the NAACP. There's certainly a whole set of issues that have to do with civil rights issues. You can't on one hand say that you are supporting a community and on the other hand say you're going to close these schools, and then you're going to close these schools the way you are doing it. It would be one thing to enter into the discussion, spend a year talking to people, figure out what it is they want, actually have those conversations. But to set it up in a way that you're not going to have any conversation, and when somebody lets the community know, to attack him for being the one who has breached protocol is unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, yeah. I mean, when you have disproportionality of people of color who are affected by this, the closing of these schools, that's racist. It's racist and it's wrong and it's not okay. It's illegal. And I hope there is some action that's going to be taken here about the violation of civil rights, for sure, because it is so unfair in every possible conceivable way. Now they have 2 student board members, and I was so impressed by what these 2 young women said, and their names are, because I have them right here, Samantha Powell and Natalie Gallegos Chavez, both student directors on the board. And in particular, Miss Gallegos Chavez was the only person who pointed out, besides certainly everybody was talking about the school closures, but she was talking about her experience in her school and where she and her friends who are not going to school because they are afraid. They're afraid of, they're either quarantining or they're concerned that if they go to school, they will be put in a position where they will catch COVID or that they will be given to somebody in their household. So they're not going. And there are thousands of children in Oakland and thousands and thousands and thousands of children across the state of California who are staying home. And what Ms. Gallegos Chavez said is that they're not offered any education at all because we cannot do virtual learning in any way because the state decided they didn't trust our community, our teachers and our districts to be able to handle going in and out of virtual learning. So they took virtual learning off the table and made it so that we get nothing. Yeah. So those are the lawmakers who did that under pressure from, very anti-teacher, anti-school, public school individuals who really are angry that we did close, and those were the people in the streets, open the schools. And well, now they fixed it so that we can't do that. No, we can't do that because they're not going to get ADA if they go virtual. So
right.
It's more difficult.
Right. So that's where we are this week. And that is not a good place to be.
It's not a good place to be at all. So yeah, that student, oh my gosh. I mean, that's the dilemma our children are in, that's the dilemma that they don't want to bring it home and they don't want to get sick themselves. So there are some, are we ready to talk about places that are doing it right, you think?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay. So Mono County Health Department, the public health officer, a few weeks ago, January 8th, made a statement ordering the temporary in-person closure of Mammoth High Schools and Mammoth Middle Schools. It's a very small district. They have very small districts, but listing all the names and temporary closure because they, and this is what I find amazing, that there were 23% of the students had been absent since January 4th, and 19% of the staff had been absent due to COVID. I mean, this is like real, we've got double that.
Right,
We're not doing anything.
right.
This is individuals who have a high regard for human life, for teachers, for staff, and for their community, because she even says, we don't want this outbreak to continue and go into the community. So,
So, and it's not like we haven't had our health, the equivalent of our, the folks in the Contra Costa Health Department approached to do the same thing, right?
yes. And they were by teachers who asked, here's what one county health officer did, and if we can't do it here. And they were just told, go talk to your principal or something. So there's a real pass the buck when it comes to our local response. Very much so, not taking responsibility and really not caring. And
The thing beyond that is not taking, even saying, all right, well, what we all need to do is join together and advocate in Sacramento to say, look, we do have to have virtual learning for children that are unable to come to school. This is a tool we now have. I mean, if this was 10 years ago, we would have nothing. We could say,
Right.
come by and pick up a packet, right?
so we have the solutions, yeah. And one last part I want to share is, they said this order is intended to reduce the likelihood of exposure to COVID-19 in the schools, thereby slowing the spread of COVID-19 in the community and the county as well as on larger to communities worldwide. As the presence of individuals increases, the difficulty and the magnitude of tracing individuals who may have been exposed to a case rises exponentially. So that's somebody who's thinking globally and understands how this whole thing works. So a shout out, one of our shout outs.
Big shout out to Mono County. And they
Yes.
changed it because as
They
their
did.
numbers went down,
Yes,
right, they were going to be closed until the 28th and they opened on the 24th.
yeah,
It's not like you can't do that,
yeah,
but
because
at
it
least you
worked.
are,
It worked doing what they did. And they
Right.
also excluded preschools from that.
Right.
And so that was okay. But Karen K. Slack is the local health officer.
Dr. Slack.
Dr. Slack. Yeah. So shout out to her for that. And like we said, well, there's always good practices out there. If we just had some leaders, local leaders who have the courage to step up and do that. But we don't. And here we are. So
Right. So we are calling out to people. I mean, we could do a lot of things. You can start a petition, but it's not as if they don't know. They do know.
they do know. And don't
Right?
care.
They do know. They do know that thousands of children are home and that they made a rule that makes it impossible for them to be taught and that they want them to come to school. Well, they're wanting them to come to school. It's not making them come to school because they are afraid to come to school. And they're not going to come as long as they're afraid and they don't trust that the school is in fact the safest place for them to be.
And the disproportionality there again, those who are staying home, whether sick, whether scared, whether contacting others, is disproportionately children of color. And
That's right. And poor children, poor children in general, right? The children who are the lowest income families are the ones who have the most to lose and who find it, they live in intergenerational homes. They're fearful for their older family members. All of those things continue to be the case. And here we are in January as we're going into February. Yeah. And it really is unconscionable that our legislators cannot find a way to say it would be okay to teach them while they're at home rather than demanding. Talk about learning loss. They are demanding, they are legislating learning loss.
Our leaders are really, they're failing us. They really are failing schools and our students. They're really failing, and it's just horrible. And on the county Board of Education, we've been getting these emails, and I'm so thankful. Emails from our district about what's happening, about the demands. They're consistent in what the needs are. And I just want to keep sending those, please. And some of them are very well put together and very eloquent. Are we ready for me to share? I want
Sure, go ahead.
lines here. Talking about the experience and the demands. And finally, that a virtual school option should be allowed for classes experiencing COVID outbreaks. The real learning loss is coming from the many absent students at home quarantining who are not given the option to learn virtually while away from their classroom setting. Our leaders should be doing everything they can to communicate with lawmakers about how essential it is that schools and classrooms have the option to go virtual to maintain safe and continuous learning for all students. I mean, that just really says it right there. That's
it. And that is exactly what we have to do. This is not about us wanting to close schools down. It's not about saying that we need to go back into all virtual forever, which is somehow the subtext for the fear here. This is not about not keeping schools open. This is about saying these children who you are forcing to have learning loss. You are legislating learning loss. That's my new term. They are legislating learning loss.
That's a good phrase. Yeah, that's very
right.
true.
That's it. That's our new motto. This is it. Stop legislating learning loss.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that so everybody can tag that. Stop legislating learning loss, because that is what is happening in California.
Yes.
That is what's happening in California.
Okay.
So we hope next week we have better news.
Yes.
And we'll know more about where Oakland is next week, and hopefully there'll be better news there for their schools. But this will be a week where there's lots of activity, and I totally support the Oakland families who are trying desperately to keep their schools open.
And your shout out was to
my shout out is to Mr. Hutchinson, Director Hutchinson, who brought it to everybody's attention and who is fighting mightily to keep these schools open, and to the two student directors who spoke so eloquently to the whole issue, Miss Samantha Powell and the very eloquent supporter of learning. Oh, she wants her to be able to learn at home, Miss Gallegos Chavez.
less than, yes.
That's it. So with that, we'll see you next week.